Country music was not like it is now. Country music was down your nose at that time.
They called them outlaws, but that wasn't just a word, it was a warning. These men didn't play by the rules, and that's exactly why the world couldn't stop watching. They sang about pain like it was a friend, about faith like it was a ghost, and about freedom like it was the last thing they'd ever hold on to. In a world of polished smiles and radio-perfect hits, these country icons carved their names into history by being brutally honest. Their lives were filled with heartbreak, addiction, redemption, and rebellion, the very DNA of country music itself. But the truth behind their legacies isn't all glory. It's a struggle, it's a loss. It's the cost of being real in an industry that often rewards the fake. And as we trace their stories, from prison cells to platinum records, from bar fights to standing ovations, you'll see why the country's greatest legends were never saints. They were survivors. Watch yourself. Johnny Cash. The man in black's shadow never faded. It's impossible to talk about rebellion in country music without saying his name first, Johnny Cash. But his legend wasn't born in fame. It was forged in guilt. From the start, Cash seemed haunted by his brother's tragic death, by his father's coldness, and by the chaos always chasing him. When Cash sang Folsom Prison Blues, it didn't sound like a song, it sounded like a confession. He wasn't performing for applause. He was talking to the part of every man that's ever wanted a second chance. And when he stood in front of those real inmates at Folsom Prison, dressed head to toe in black, the world finally understood. He wasn't singing to them. He was singing for them. But behind the legend was a man unraveling. Addictions took hold, his marriage fell apart, and fame only made the darkness louder. There were nights when Cash was found collapsed on the road, a shadow of himself. Yet somehow, through all that chaos, he found redemption in faith, in June Carter, and in the realization that pain was his truth. When the world thought he was finished, Cash came back, older, weathered, and realer than ever. His cover of Hurt decades later wasn't just a song. It was a farewell letter from a man who had seen heaven and hell, often in the same day. Johnny Cash didn't wear black because it looked cool. He wore it because he carried every sinner's story in his chest, and he never wanted anyone to forget it. But while Cash turned his demons into redemption, another outlaw learned to wear his sins like a badge, and his name was Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard, the prisoner who became the poet. Before Merle Haggard ever sang about rebellion, he lived it. Born in a boxcar, abandoned by luck, and locked up before he could vote, Merle's early life was a song waiting to be written. When he watched Johnny Cash perform at San Quentin, he wasn't in the crowd as a fan. He was there as an inmate. That moment changed everything. Haggard saw something in Cash, a kind of freedom that didn't depend on walls or gates. When he walked out of prison, he promised himself he'd never go back. But Merle didn't want to sing polished country tunes about sunshine and second chances. He wanted to sing about reality, about the pain that keeps you awake, about the pride of being an Okie from Muskogee, about the confusion of a country changing too fast. Critics couldn't pin him down. Some called him patriotic, others called him controversial. But to the working men who filled his shows, Merle was one of them, flawed, raw, and unfiltered. He didn't care about radio approval. He cared about truth. His songs became the voice of a forgotten America, one that didn't have time for fancy words or fake smiles. But fame came with its own prison. The pressures, the tours, the spotlight, they pushed him back toward the chaos he'd once escaped. Alcohol became his comfort, but the music never stopped flowing. Even in his darkest years, Merle's pen never ran dry. When the world tried to put him in a box, he broke every one of them. He wasn't Nashville's poster boy, he was country's conscience. But while Merle fought for the soul of the working man, another legend fought battles he could never quite win, especially the ones inside his own heart. George Jones, the voice that could break a nation. If Johnny Cash was the outlaw and Merle was the poet, then George Jones was the heart, broken beautiful and bleeding. His voice could make silence cry. But behind that golden tone was a life that fell apart faster than any melody could fix. Jones was the kind of singer who didn't just perform heartbreak, he lived it. His drinking wasn't a rumor. It was a lifestyle that nearly destroyed him. Friends would say he'd disappear for days, leaving fans and promoters guessing if he'd even show up to his own shows. Sometimes he didn't. The story of No-Show Jones became part of his myth. He was unpredictable, unreliable, but unforgettable. And when he did show up, he'd sing with a pain that made every missed show worth forgiving. His hit, "He Stopped Loving Her Today," wasn't just another song. It was an obituary for love itself. Even people who'd never listened to country music could feel that ache. His marriage to Tammy Wynette was a storm that the tabloids couldn't stop covering. They loved, they fought, they broke, all in front of an audience that couldn't look away. Jones once drove a riding lawnmower 8 miles to buy more whiskey after Tammy hid his car keys, a story that's become country legend. But beneath the chaos was a man desperate for peace. Later in life, when he finally found sobriety, George Jones reflected on how close he'd come to losing everything. He said, "The only thing I couldn't destroy was the music." And he was right. His songs outlived his mistakes. George Jones taught the world that perfection never made great art. Pain did. Cash gave us faith. Haggard gave us truth. And Jones gave us heartbreak. Together, they didn't just define country music, they defined what it means to be human. Randy Travis, the saint who fell from grace. If George Jones's story was heartbreak, then Randy Travis's story was redemption, at least for a while. He arrived at a time when country music needed saving. The 80 seconds had seen the genre drift into pop gloss, but Randy brought it back to its roots. Deep baritones, gospel soul, and songs that sounded like they were carved out of honesty itself. When he sang "Forever and Ever, Amen," the world believed him. There was no flash, no rebellion, just sincerity. For a while, he became the perfect picture of what country music should be. But as with every saint in Nashville, perfection is temporary. The pressure to stay pure, to live up to that clean image, began to crack the surface. Randy's personal life started unraveling, first quietly, then publicly. His once idyllic marriage fell apart. The tabloids that once praised his faith now printed his failures in bold. Then came the night that shocked everyone. Police footage leaked. Randy, intoxicated, disoriented, and unrecognizable. The man who once stood as the moral compass of country music had lost his own direction. Fans didn't know what to do with it. Heartbreak, disappointment, confusion. The voice that once brought calm to millions was now a headline. But what makes Randy's story unforgettable isn't the fall, it's the fight back. Years later, when a massive stroke nearly ended his ability to speak, let alone sing, he refused to disappear. He stood on stage, tears streaming down his face, barely able to form words, and the crowd carried the song for him. It was one of the most emotional moments in country music history. A man who had fallen harder than most, standing again, even if only barely. Randy Travis showed the world that redemption doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in survival. And if Randy's story was about grace, then Toby Keith's was about grit because he didn't care who loved him or who hated him, as long as they listened. Toby Keith, the patriot who divided a nation. Toby Keith didn't walk into country music to make friends. He came to make noise. Big, loud, unapologetic noise. And when America was shaken in the early 2000s, Toby's voice became one of its loudest echoes. Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue wasn't just a song. It was a battle cry. To some, it was pure patriotism. To others, it was blind aggression. But Toby didn't flinch. He said what he felt, and he didn't apologize for it. In an era where most artists tiptoed around controversy, he stomped right through it in cowboy boots. His feud with the Dixie Chicks became one of the biggest media firestorms in country history. They mocked him. He fired back. The press couldn't get enough. But behind that tough, patriotic exterior was a man who understood showmanship. Toby knew that in modern country, controversy could be as powerful as a chorus. Yet, outside the spotlight, Toby Keith's story carried more depth than many realized. He was a dedicated father, a businessman, and a quiet philanthropist who donated millions to veterans and children's hospitals. But the same fire that fueled his career eventually took its toll. When news broke years later that Toby was battling cancer, it hit fans like a freight train. The same man who'd built his image on strength and defiance was now facing a fight he couldn't win with lyrics or attitude. And when he passed, the tributes poured in, not just from those who agreed with him, but from those who respected him. Toby Keith left behind more than songs. He left a legacy of courage, the kind that doesn't ask for approval, only honesty. From Cash's black coat to Keith's red, white, and blue, every one of these legends carried the same fire, the refusal to fake it. And that brings us to the heart of it all. Conclusion: the price of being real. When you look back at all these men, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Randy Travis, Toby Keith, it's easy to see the fame, the glory, the legends carved into vinyl and memory. But if you listen closer, there's something deeper that ties them all together. They were real. Sometimes painfully real. They didn't chase perfection. They chased truth, even when it destroyed them. Cash turned pain into poetry. Haggard turned rebellion into identity. Jones made heartbreak immortal. Travis turned failure into faith. And Toby Keith turned controversy into courage. Every generation of country music has tried to polish the sound, clean up the image, and make it safer. But these men prove that a country's soul was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be honest. That's what keeps people coming back. Because no matter how much time passes, we all see a little bit of ourselves in those struggles, in the mistakes, in the redemption, in the humanity that never needed a filter. Maybe that's why their stories still matter. Because they remind us that the most powerful voices aren't always the prettiest. They're the ones that bleed when they sing. So before you click away, think about this. Which of these legends do you think left the biggest mark on country music? Was it Cash's rebellion, Haggard's truth, Jones's heartbreak, Travis's redemption, or Keith's defiance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to see which one still hits hardest for you. Because in the end, the story of country music isn't just theirs, it's ours.